right, so we're now recording. So, Chris Vance, Phil Fortunato, I want to thank both of you for coming in. We're going to do kind of a joint interview. This is somewhere in between a debate and an interview. Like the point here is not necessarily for you to cross-examine each other on each question, but that'll naturally happen. And I think this is an opportunity to very efficiently go through issues that are important to voters, see where you guys stand on them. And I think the advantage of doing it this way is we're going to get some cross-play between the two of you, get some interaction, and I think that's going to be for the benefit of all voters to really see the both of you respond to each other. So I want to start with a question, probably the easiest one on the list, and I guess we'll start with one of you. We'll probably go back and forth for each question. So we'll start with Phil for this one, and then we'll go to Chris for the next one, back and forth. Do you support the proposed Enumclaw Airport? And I'm starting with the question that I know the answer for both of you, but let's start with the easy one.
Well, first of all, the problem that you have, aside from the fact that it's a stupid location for us, it would totally destroy the entire district. It would, if you could imagine Enumclaw becoming SeaTac, and then all the other ancillary stuff that goes along with that. It would just destroy the rural nature and the character of our district, all up and down 410. You need $6-7 billion in highway improvements. 410 would be a 6-lane highway. Aside from that, the other problem is the legislation that was passed to enable this commission to the first place specifically eliminated the King County. You couldn't evaluate King County. Location in King County. Now, here you are, you're a legislator, you come up, you review the stuff, you vote on this particular piece of legislation, and then some consultant decides that, well, it doesn't really matter what the legislation says, I am going to just put this in here to give everybody a better evaluation, and this is what I think. Well, who the heck elected that guy? And what the heck are we if we're an elected official representing the people in my district? What does that mean? And anytime somebody says, well, the legislature says, they can always change the legislation, which is the danger. So that's why we need to be a little more proactive and basically nip this thing in the bud before it gets too far down the road. It's easy to change it when it's far away. The closer it gets, the harder it is to change.
Yeah, this is one where the senator and I completely agree. It's an insane location. I can't understand how it even got on the list for all the reasons that the senator said. Back in the 1990s, I was a member of the King County Council and represented the Valley cities, and then my district turned towards Puget Sound and represented the whole SeaTac area. So I was in the middle of the debate over the third runway and fighting hard to try and stop the expansion of SeaTac Airport. And one of the main arguments was, yes, this region needs more airport capacity. SeaTac, even with a third runway, is not enough. So we should get started now on building a second major regional airport, but not in King County, and certainly not in the middle of the Enumclaw Plateau. I was also on the county council heavily involved in growth management. I was the chairman of the growth management committee and land use protection and farmland protection. And one of the smartest things and best things King County ever did was asking the voters to approve a property tax levy to purchase the development rights on the Enumclaw Plateau to preserve it to be rural forever. It is, I don't know, and that law is in effect. The money's changed hands. I don't know how the state can possibly get around that. This feels like a decision that some consultant put in without fully consulting the law or the facts. If the commission doesn't take it off the list, the next legislature needs to pass a bill to expressly take it off the list, and I'll be right in front of that.
Yeah.
But what that means is we're going to pass a law to basically say, well, the law that we really passed, we really, really want to do it.
Well, yeah.
Right. And, one of the things that's kind of interesting is the farmland preservation that Chris mentions is actually being a little detrimental in downtown Enumclaw here, because there's some areas under farmland preservation that are in the middle of town.
Sure.
That the city.
City probably wants to develop them.
They want to develop that, and that sort of goes hand in hand with growth management, which is keep the jobs closer to where people live, instead of making people, live in Graham and work in Kent. Or a guy said to me one time, I live in Redmond, or I live in Renton, I work in Redmond, what are you going to do for my commute? And I said, well, why don't you live in Redmond? And his response was, it's too expensive. Think it's too expensive because there's no land out there? No, there's land up the wazoo out there. It's just artificially restricted by the Growth Management Act.
I assume you probably both heard that the county council, and I think this is probably Reagan Dunn spearheaded this effort, but they're gonna take it to a vote and ask the council to call on WashDOT to just kick this site from their aviation plan altogether and just say, look, if this site doesn't work, why are we even spending the resources to consider it? Do you kind of support broadly that attitude?
Of course, and the county has a lot of leverage here. And we did back then. I could not get the county council to be unanimous in opposition to the third runway for obvious reasons. Nobody wanted anything in their area. But on this, the county council should be united. And regional transportation planning has to be consistent with a metropolitan transportation plan that is approved by a body called the Puget Sound Regional Council. King County is the largest government in the Puget Sound Regional Council. If King County chooses to be united and oppose this, they can make it stop.
Right.
But if all else fails, the legislature has to act.
Gotcha. Thanks, guys. I'm actually gonna make sure my phone doesn't run out of juice here, so give me just 10 seconds. Always some technical stuff gotta do on the fly, but. Pull this back just a little bit.
It's gonna make the recording interesting.
Oh, I know. Everyone's gonna skip ahead and see that the perspective changed after 3 minutes in. All right, whoops. Okay. Well, that was probably the easiest question I had on the list, so it only gets spicier from there. Okay, okay. All right. I want to get onto another issue that I think kind of broadly, I think you would both kind of take the same overtones on as far as your role in the legislature, which is law enforcement. Now, we've had sort of two very interesting legislative sessions as far as policing goes. You had the 2020 session, kind of in the tumult of the George Floyd, killing in that summer, and you had, a real rush of bills that restricted a lot of abilities of law enforcement. And then I think there was a sense of, some people called it a correction, other people called it, a reversal, but some of those were ratcheted back last year, not others. I want to ask both of you, what is the right balance, for law enforcement, for people in the state, to make sure police can sort of do their jobs properly, but they're not also, we're not running into situations where people are having their rights violated.
Right.
We can start with you, Chris.
Yeah, this is, I'm running as an independent because I'm not comfortable with either party. And this is an example where I think the Democrats have been very wrong. They went way too far in terms of trying to restrict what police do in the field. I understand why. The George Floyd incident and many others where cops acted completely inappropriately, beyond inappropriately, criminally. I understand the motivation, but it is just not possible for 147 politicians sitting on the floor of the House and Senate to rewrite how police are trained and long-standing practices and what they are able to do in the field. So the Democrats passed these bills. They since have walked several of them back. The walking back needs to continue in the next session. I think the answer is much more increased accountability for police. That's why the state, we became the first, as I understand it, to create an independent body to investigate police brutality, police inappropriate behavior. That's the right approach. When we believe that the cops have done something wrong, hold them accountable. Try them, convict them, make sure they never get to carry a gun or a badge again. But trying to change how they do the job in the field is just not realistic. But I'll say something else. the crime is almost out of control in this state, in this region. And there's a lot of reasons why. We can talk about what's causing the crime, but I do know this. What the state can do to make the situation better is to better fund local law enforcement. The system we use to fund county governments is antiquated and inadequate, and that's why you see massive staffing shortfalls in the King County Jail, the Pierce County Jail, the King County Sheriff's Department, the Prosecutor's Office. It's because county revenues are capped at 1% growth per year, far below the rate of inflation, or the number one revenue source they use to pay for county government. And if somebody gets arrested in Enumclaw tonight, they're arrested by an Enumclaw cop, but they go to the King County Jail, King County Prosecutor, King County Public Defense. And counties are the main source of criminal justice. The state needs to step in and do more to help counties provide for greater numbers of cops and corrections officers and judges and prosecutors, because the system right now is massively overwhelmed. And I could talk more about exactly what I think we need to be doing. It's not raising property taxes, it's the state assuming its responsibility for indigent defense, or public defense. But let's put the blame where it really should be, and that is our system, our criminal justice system is massively overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, you said the walking back should continue, and I wanted to just real quickly, see what specifically you'd like to see, ratcheted back. And I'm assuming one of those things would be the rule on police chases.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes.
That's probably a big one, I think, for a lot of people. So you'd
Yes.
want to see that go back to, if not the way it was before, at least closer to that original standard.
Yes, and this is important. I was a lawmaker for 11 years. I learned that on some things you absolutely know what you're going to do. Others, you got to wait to see how the bill is written. So I'm in favor of moving backwards from the ability right now that cops don't have to engage in chases. It's clearly dangerous. The specifics of how we put in the bill, I want to see. Does it go far enough? Does it go too far? But definitely this is something that's got to get fixed.
Gotcha. Just check my recording real quick. All right, we're good. Phil, same question for you. What's the right balance here?
So, George Floyd incident happens. An initiative is passed. And everybody, including the people that sponsored that initiative for, quote, police reform, agreed that it was too overreaching. We then sponsored, there was a House Bill 3003. That was basically a fix to the initiative. That bill was worked. Law enforcement agreed, everybody agreed, they came out with this mutual thing, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna make some changes, we're gonna do this review board, we're gonna have the Criminal Justice Training Commission is gonna do this. So that was a bill that virtually everybody agreed. Now the Democrats then tried to pass it unconstitutionally because you had an initiative to the legislature for the police reform. You can't change, so the legislature can only do three things. Pass it, becomes law. Do nothing, goes to the ballot. Or put that and an alternative on the ballot. Everybody agreed that this was bad. Everybody agreed that it needed to be fixed then. But you can't change an initiative in the same session. So, the Democrats came out with the quote fix that said, we're gonna pass this bill, 3003, which is going to amend an initiative that we didn't pass yet. And I stood on the floor in the Senate and said, how am I supposed to vote on this? How am I supposed to change a law that doesn't exist yet? Now, the solution to that, legislatively and constitutionally, is they could have passed the bill, passed the initiative, could have waited till midnight, could have had a special session, 10 minutes, could have passed the bill. Would have been done in another session, could have done it, 2/3 majority, everybody agreed, not a problem, could have done it. They didn't do it that way. It winds up going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said you didn't do one of the three things. Went on the ballot, so another year went by, went on the ballot, people voted on it, they passed it. We then changed it again. So now we had an agreed upon police reform bill. Not 1 year later, before any of these things were actually able to be implemented and put into place to actually see what the effect of this reform is, they started this deluge of these other crazy bills restricting police. Chokeholds, this, that, couldn't use tear gas. I go, now, the King County cops would not go into downtown Seattle for that riot because they wouldn't allow, Seattle wouldn't allow them to use tear gas. Now, the end result of that was they turned a demonstration into a riot, into seizing part of the city. That's what happens when you restrict the use of some of these things. Now, the concern with tear gas was some innocent people might cry. So you could use other non-lethal things, like water cannons, of which we don't have. And if anybody's ever been hit with a fire hose, that's not a non-lethal thing. You knocked over, crack your head open on the sidewalk. Or, by the way, rubber bullets. That was a suggestion, which killed people. So this is crazy stuff. These people have no idea what they're talking about. And if we went back to where we did when we had that agreed upon reform, police gave up malice. Now, you know what that means? That means they have to willfully intend to do something, right, in order to avoid prosecution. So they gave up part of that, and part of this compromise. And how are they respected? I mean, all the stuff that these people done. Excuse me. Democrats have repeatedly, you know, I jokingly said Democrats reduce crime by making crime legal. Okay, the Blake decision with the drugs. People go walking down the street shooting up drugs. I mean, cops don't even bother arresting people for drugs because, you know, all they got to do is say that's not my pair of pants, which was the Blake thing. So now we have drugs out of control. We have, along with that, the crime that goes related with drugs out of control. And all of this is because of the Democrats' view on how to address crime. Mm-hmm. And, by the way, I want to touch a little bit about guns. I happen to be a pro-gun person. I make no bones about that. I told people I'm pro-life and I'm pro-gun. Now, Democrats want people who committed crimes with a firearm, okay, to be able to vote, to do this, that, and get their gun rights back. Now, I happen to be a pro-gun guy. I will fight tooth and nail for your right to keep and bear arms, protect your family. But if a person goes out there and commits a violent crime or uses a firearm in the commission of a crime, I don't want that guy to have a gun. I mean, what are you talking about? You know, if you're talking about public safety, and then you're gonna go ahead and give a guy back a gun that used it in a violent manner to commit a crime, and you're gonna give that person back a gun, and you're gonna give him the right to vote in prison. I mean, this is crazy stuff. And that's the kind of things that we are being handed with this Democrat control.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any response to that, Chris?
Well, the senator has an inherent advantage because as closely as I follow state government, it's part of my job, I'm not there every day yet and don't know everything, but I would be very surprised if the Democrats would ever propose to give convicted felons back their gun rights because that would be a violation of federal law. So there's a lot of times the senator says things that I'm not quite sure I understand what he's saying. They just don't seem very grounded in reality. Generally speaking, I think I agree with him that the Democrats have gone too far to try and regulate how police do their jobs. But you got to be a bit sensitive here. My son lived in an apartment near Cal Anderson Park when those riots were going on. His, minding his own business, his apartment filled with tear gas. He did a little more than just cry. It was, so when the police, you have to have some empathy for human beings and understand that the cops really did some very aggressive things. But the answer is to hold them accountable when they do the wrong thing, not try and issue them such restrictive regulations and laws in the field that they can't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the question comes in is who holds them accountable? The Democrats have turned around and taking an evaluation board to do an evaluation on a proper shoot. For example, if a police officer was basically a righteous shoot or not. And they've taken that and they've diluted that and they've put all kinds of people on there, Black Lives Matter people, 16-year-old kids, and those are going to be the ones that are going to determine whether or not this officer, was within his rights or behaved properly. I mean, that's crazy. And by the way, if you are a felon and you have your gun rights taken away. However, if you serve your term, you serve your parole, you go through all that stuff, you make restitution, you can get your gun rights back. I don't have a problem with that. You wrote a bad check and you went to jail and you're a felon and you got your gun rights taken away and you went through and you did all that process. I have no problem whatsoever with you getting your gun rights back. But if you commit a crime and you use a firearm in the commission of a crime, I don't want you ever to be able to have a gun.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
I want to go back. He throws out the term Black Lives Matter in a disparaging fashion. Black Lives Matter. And Black Americans have a right to be concerned over how they are routinely treated by the criminal justice system. If you don't think that there is systemic racism in our criminal justice system demonstrated over and over again, I've seen it, I know people who've experienced it, and they should have a right to be part of the process, and we shouldn't just trust police departments to do all the reviews on this. The Minneapolis Police Department was ready to clear George Floyd until the Attorney General stepped in. We need to have outside scrutiny of our police agencies and have respect for members of the community, and not throw around derisive terms, using Black Lives Matter as though it's a curse word. I mean, I understand why they're worried about things, and they should be part of the process.
I want to stay on this topic a little. There's some other things I want to get to, but this is an interesting. I like where we're going here.
I should have worn my Italian Lives Matter T-shirt. All right.
You think that there is a difference between how white Italian Americans have been treated in our criminal justice system and how black people have been treated in our criminal justice system? You really think that? You're just being glib.
You have to back out. You have to back up a little bit, because here, when you use the term systemic racism, okay, what you are saying is the default of a system is racist. That's what you're saying. You're saying that the default, absent anything else, is racist.
No,
I don't believe that.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what systemic racism means.
No, it's not. It means that
Let's let him say what he.
It means that the system has been heavily influenced by racism. And in a country where people were held as slaves for hundreds of years, where when I was in elementary school, there was still redlining in Seattle where you could buy houses and where you couldn't, where the city of Seattle was still dealing with that, and where you still have cases over and over again of black people being treated differently in the criminal justice system, being treated differently by private home appraisers. To say that there isn't racism in the society that needs to be dealt with is just wrong and insensitive. Doesn't mean that everybody's racist all the time, but to just throw out terms like, well, Black Lives Matter and stuff, which is what the Republicans have reduced themselves to. The party that was founded on fighting for civil rights and ending slavery for black people has become racist itself. That's where the systemic racism is, in the Trump Republican Party.
It's kind of interesting that this guy brings this up. The Liberian community, the Liberian Association of Washington, made me an honorary Liberian member. They happen to be black. Congolese Integration Network invited me to be the keynote speaker at their event. I hosted a delegation from both Liberia, a couple of Liberian senators, and a delegation from the Congo, 2 delegations from the Congo. Now, one of the comments that was made by, I don't know whether you were on with Dave Updegrove, but one of the comments that Dave Updegrove made at one of these presentations was how racist America was. And a gentleman that was born in South Africa stood up and castigated him by saying, "You have no idea what racism is. I grew up in South Africa, etc. This is a great country. Now, if you want to end racism, stop being racist." That's the way you end racism. You don't end racism by running around accusing everybody of being a racist. I mean, when people from the Congo say to me, your Democrats are kind of racist, yeah, I agree with that. They are. I mean, they demean people. Can you explain to me how, when you're sitting there at a hearing and somebody says, people of color are disproportionately affected by climate change?
They are.
Okay, how is that, Chris?
Because they live in communities that don't have the advantages of wealth to mitigate the effects of the climate change.
So you're saying that a quote person based on his skin color, okay, is somehow disproportionately affected by climate change?
No.
Now you can say to me, for example, lower income people live in less desirable areas. You can say that to me.
Right,
I would believe that.
lower income people are disproportionately not white.
Okay, tell that to the black guy who lives in a gated community. Tell that, I mean, it's degrading. It is a degrading situation to be lumping people together based on skin color. You know what? I don't care what color skin you are. I just care whether you're a decent person. I don't associate with people that are jerks. If you're white, black, whatever, and you're a jerk, I don't associate with you. If you're white, black, whatever, and you're not, and you're believe in God, and you happen to be in similar political philosophy, your skin color doesn't make any difference.
I do want to move on in a minute from this topic, but for the sake of this point, which I think is an interesting one, one of the examples I've heard of, because I think this is a confusing thing for people, how can these groups be disproportionately impacted? So one thing I've read is that communities of that tend to have more black people or less white people, there's a correlation with them having less trees. So like you go to an urban area, black neighborhoods tend to have less urban canopy, right? And one of the results is trees are really good on a hot day at absorbing that heat. They provide shade, they keep, and you can see a measurable difference on the scorchers that we get this time of year. It can be like a 10-degree difference. And so the argument that I've heard based on that, data point, I guess, is that, if you are a black person or, a Hispanic person or whatever, your odds of being in a community like that has those challenges are greater than if you're a white person. So it's a sort of aggregate, on balance, you're more likely to run into these.
Yeah, but it's based on income. I mean, it's an income related thing. It has nothing to do with skin color. Therefore, what we need to do is we need to make sure that everybody in this country and everybody in this state has an equal opportunity. They have an equal opportunity for a job. If somebody comes to me and says, I did not get a promotion because of my skin color, I'm going to fight tooth and nail for that person. But when you have a discriminatory bill, I-1000, that basically says colleges can discriminate against Asians because there's too many Asians getting into college, that's racism. And it does not belong in this country, and it does not belong in this state.
So maybe it's the last word. Look. We have had a history in this country, and in the Republican Party, which I led in this state, of admitting our racist past and seeking to make things better by passing the Voting Rights Act, by passing bills against housing discrimination, by making it easier for people to vote, by teaching our kids about the facts that, again, when I was born in big parts of this country, people couldn't vote. Black people couldn't vote, okay? And admitting that, and too many Republicans now, not all, but too many, including my opponent, I think, want to stop that and reverse it, which is why he writes a letter to the Attorney General claiming ridiculously that there's critical race theory being taught in our schools, and why he sponsors legislation to go back to the 1970s in terms of how we vote, forcing everybody to once again go out on a Tuesday and actually go someplace physically to vote when maybe they don't have a job that lets them do that, or they're disabled. We've made it easier for people to vote, and trying to roll that back is racism.
Okay, I don't know what the heck you're
real quick,
talking
and then
about,
we'll move on,
Chris.
Phil. Real quick, and we'll move on. But
Well,
go
I don't
ahead.
know what the heck you're talking about. What bill are you talking about?
what
You got a bill number?
you and the rest of the so-called Freedom Caucus introduced a bill to ban vote by mail and say everybody had to vote in person and show their ID in a physical location.
Well, people like that.
No,
Some
they-
some people like that.
Rich
Some
white
peop-
people like that. Republicans like that because they make it harder for black people to vote.
Yeah,
and
I don't
I
recall that
guarantee you, the
particular bill,
overwhelming
but-
majority of the people in this district and this state support vote by mail.
Absolutely, and I tell people that.
Then
I
why'd
said,
you
you
introduce a
know,
bill to ban
you
it?
may not like vote by mail, but if you were going to run an initiative to say get rid of it, it wouldn't pass.
You
because
introduced a
people-
bill to get rid of it. And you
So
run
what?
around lying about the so-called stolen election. You wrote a letter to the Secretary of State trying to get her to stop the certification of the 2020 election.
I did not write a letter.
Yes, you
that said
did.
that. Well,
It's on your homepage of your webpage.
What are you talking about?
You wrote a letter to Kim Wyman urging her to not certify the election in the normal course of business in 2020. Go back and check your own webpage.
Yeah.
Okay, we can talk about
We will, and we'll return to some of this, and you know, I'll look all these things up and maybe reconnect with both of you if we're done here. But I do want to move on.
Yeah.
That was great. I think that was very useful. I do want to. Sorry, I'm messing. Okay, so we're gonna move on just a little bit here. Actually, quite a bit. I'm going to shift gears to another topic that is only slightly controversial in Washington State, which is the coronavirus. You two have taken pretty different approaches, I would say, in your attitudes towards how the state should manage it. And I think it's important for people to know there is a distinction between you know, what a politician or what a person believes should be done about the coronavirus and what should be mandated. And so I know that is an important distinction, and I'm sure you two will go into. But I guess the question that I want to start off with here is, how much of an emergency is COVID-19 at this stage? You know, we're 2 to 3 years, you know, past the initial you know, outbreak in our area. Some time has passed. What measures would you support, you know, in order to combat it? And then finally, what are your thoughts on Governor Inslee's emergency declaration, and, you know, is it time for that to stop? Should it continue? I think, who went first last time?
It's his turn.
It's your turn, Phil, so.
Okay, so we get a briefing when this whole thing started. What was it, 2020? So we get a briefing when this whole thing starts. And we are basically told 100,000 people are going to die. Somebody's going to touch something, and a week later somebody else will touch it, get the virus, and die. Hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. There's going to be hospital beds and parking lots. It's going to be catastrophic. Now, when you are told that, it seemed prudent that what the governor did at the time, shut things down to figure out what was going on. I supported it. But a while later, 30 days, 60 days later, you didn't hear about any massive outbreaks. People were going to Costco, people are going to Fred Meyer, people are going to Walmart. You didn't hear about any massive outbreaks. And what that said was, it seemed that if you did reasonable healthcare, you had a reasonable healthcare protocol in place. At that time, they were sterilizing the cars, people were washing their hands more, people were wearing a mask, whatever it was. That if you had a reasonable healthcare protocol in place, why couldn't you open up your business? Okay, there was a shop in here somewhere, small little store, sold baby clothes, can't remember what was here in Bonnie Lake, sold baby clothes. Why is she shut down as non-essential? Who the heck is the governor to tell me that my business is essential or non-essential? Who the heck is he? And I mean, so I could go to Walmart and buy baby clothes, but I can't go to the little local store to buy baby clothes, even though that she might get 3 or 4 customers a day, right? I mean, this was inconsistent. He shut down residential building. He shut down all this stuff. So I think it was April 9th. There's 2 sets of proclamations. There's the proclamations that he's making under emergency powers, and there's proclamations that he's making that basically waive state law. Those proclamations that require the waiving of state law, we actually agreed with. Okay, he reduced, waived penalties, waived late filing fees on stuff, waived nurses. If you were a nurse, a licensed nurse in a different state, you could come to Washington and we could use your services. I mean, so there was a whole range of things that we actually agreed with. I think it was on April 9th, I said, but the caucuses had to agree. So every week we would meet, we would go over the proclamations. And on April 9th, I said, I'm not voting for any more of these proclamations because this is no longer an emergency. This is a crisis that needs to be managed. And if he's making these decisions, we were looking at the time, a $6 billion shortfall. That's what was the projected shortfall. He's making these decisions that are affecting people's livelihoods, that are affecting businesses, that are doing all this. And at least I want the ability to represent the people in my district. Whether or not it fails or not, at least they should have a voice. So if he wants to do this, he needs to come to the legislature to do this stuff. Okay, that was April 9th. I think May 5th, Freedom Caucus had a press conference calling for a legislative special session, calling for a special session, or a legislative special session. The difference being the governor could call a special session tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to do a special session for transportation. Once you're in session, you don't have to do what the governor says. You can do whatever the heck you want. If you have a legislative special session, you have to outline in advance what you're going to do. You can only talk about that, and you need a 2/3 vote in order to call a special session.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick, Phil, and I'm sorry to do so. But we've talked about this before, and I think voters know about the efforts you had there, and I want to make sure we get.
Well, but the point is,
yeah,
it's no longer an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been an emergency since April or May of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It has been a crisis that needs to be managed. You need to get the legislative approval to do this stuff.
Wow.
Now, the difference is, look at North Dakota, look at Florida. I put on a graph the COVID deaths, COVID breakouts and the deaths, and you put that graph, and Johns Hopkins University did this. You do the graph, how many people get the virus, how many people got the death and all this stuff, and you compare it to the restrictions. We are up here, Florida and North Dakota are down here, but the wave is the same, no difference.
We'll get into the data a little bit because that is a complicated topic, but I want to send it over to Chris here because you clearly have a very different view.
Yeah, my view's grounded in reality. So none of us have enjoyed this. It's unprecedented. It's the first pandemic in roughly 100 years. And when the senator talked about, well, we were first told that we were going to have these huge death, that's if we did nothing. But thankfully, the leadership of the state of Washington did the right thing. Now, our death rate is dramatically lower than most every other state. Still, 14,000 Washingtonians died. This is a very big deal. Now, if we had done what Senator Fortunato and the other Republicans, a lot of the other Republicans, wanted to do and acted like states like Mississippi, where the death rate is twice as high, there'd literally be 10 to 15,000 more dead people in this state. What we did saved, I had nothing to do with it, but what Jay Inslee did and Dow Constantine did and responsible leaders saved lives. And saved lives by doing the normal things that Western civilizations have done in a pandemic for hundreds of years. Find a vaccine, make sure people take it, wear masks, socially isolate. This is how you deal with any sort of epidemic. And yet people made this political. And it's a hoax, or it's not that bad, or why are you opening this business and not that business? Leaders should have stood up and said, this is the most serious public health emergency we've faced, and we need to do the right things. Now, it is no longer an emergency. I don't understand why the governor has maintained the emergency status for the non-state law waiver. And there is a problem with Washington state law about it's ambiguous about how much authority the legislature has to end an emergency. I remember watching the debate on this on TV, and Senator Billig said, well, we could just pass a bill. We're in session. If we want to, we could pass a bill ending the emergency. well, I guess, but then the governor could veto it, right? I mean, we probably need to pass a bill to make it clear that the legislature can end both types of governmental proclamations by a resolution. But that's not the real issue here is the irresponsible grandstanding and flat out lying to people that could have ended up getting a lot of people killed. And again, I'm absolutely positive the overwhelming majority of people in this district, in this state, they got vaccinated. They followed the rules. They didn't protest. They didn't record goofy music videos on Facebook like the senator did about this, and are glad that they're alive today because of it.
Okay, so,
Let's do a little bit more on this topic and then we'll jump ahead, but go ahead, Phil.
okay, so first of all you need to do on the secondary proclamations, the ones that require legislative approval, is not approve it. And that was my point. I said, we, the Senate caucus, should not be approving any of these proclamations. If he wants to do them, call us back into session. Likely, the Democrats will vote and they'll do it, okay? And the first bill that the Democrats passed when we went back into session, that's what gave Jay Inslee the right to do this until he determined he didn't want to do it anymore. And all we need to do, we need a constitutional, we changed the Constitution to actually give him these powers. Now that was done after we got the briefing of Cascadia Rising, the earthquake, Mount Rainier blows up. So everybody's thinking about some natural tsunami. Nobody was thinking about this potential virus. We need to limit his emergency powers to 30 days, 60 days, whatever. Okay, some limit. I mean, in an emergency, an earthquake, whatever, somebody has to be able to make decisions and in a short period of time to in effect save lives. But when he talks about the governor saving lives, all you need to do is compare the number of deaths from suicide and drug overdoses. And you put that on the graph and it exceeds that. In addition to that, you know how many deaths we had from the flu or from pneumonia? How many deaths in the last 2 years? I asked the Department of Health. You know how many? 0. Now, every year you get 600-800 deaths to the flu. Usually that same demographic, that elderly people and all that stuff, they get the flu or pneumonia, and how many? I asked the Department of Health, how many people died of flu and pneumonia? 0. Those are all COVID deaths now. Everything's a COVID death.
Oh, please.
My best friend died. My best friend had COVID. He stayed home. He had diabetes. He stayed home. Didn't manage his blood sugar well, I guess. But anyway, he recovered from COVID, but 2 days later he died of a blood clot from diabetes. That's a COVID death. And those are the kinds of things that are skewing some of the numbers.
No, please.
So I want to kind of move us on from this topic in just a minute, and we'll, I'll be going through and kind of fact checking everything here, and there's a lot of a lot of numbers we're throwing around. Chris, go ahead and wrap us up on this, because it sounds like you've got some responses to that.
Okay, so yes, every year people die of the flu, and they die of suicide, and they die of all sorts of things, but we could prevent deaths of COVID if everyone had been supportive of the measures necessary to prevent it. And again, because of the things, look, the death rate, Mississippi has the worst death rate in the nation, okay? Washington State is nearly 1.5 times less because of the differences in terms of how politically you approached it. That's the real issue here. And undermining people's confidence by saying, well, everything's a COVID death, or it's just like the flu, or just whatever. Thank God we're past all this, because this is one of the most sorry chapters in American history where one of our two major parties decided to just ignore science, ignore reality, and got people killed because of it.
That's total BS. I'm sorry. I mean, you are so delusional. It's incredible. I go, first of all, when you say to me that one party denied science, that's nonsense. You're looking at the science, you're looking at these numbers, you're asking realistic, valid questions, and you're basing your information based on the answers to those questions. So when you're saying that the Republican Party is trying to kill people,
No,
that's a bunch of nonsense.
They didn't try and kill people, but they didn't seem to mind that they died.
No,
I think we're not gonna make a lot of headway here as far as convincing each other, but and we can return to this. I do want to move ahead a little bit and make sure that we have time to cover kind of a diversity of topics. Let's jump around a little bit. I want to talk about another issue that I know the two of you have pretty diverging issues on, and one that just this year has kind of exploded back into the national purview, I guess, and that's abortion and women's health care kind of in general. So obviously, the precedent set by Roe v. Wade has gone away. You've got some states that are re-implementing trigger laws. Washington State is probably one of the most pro-choice states in the country, so we have some pretty strong protections for that already written into our laws. I know you two have different views on that, and so I want to ask, would you seek to expand those rights, to restrict them? Are they at a good level where they are? I think we're at Chris.
It's my turn, yeah.
It's Chris' turn, so go ahead.
This is, if not the most important issue in this race, one of the top 2 or 3. It's one of the most top 2 or 3 issues in every race for the legislature in every state, because the Supreme Court has chosen to ignore stare decisis and 50 years of precedent and overturn themselves and return control of this issue to state governments. Now, my position on this has never changed since the first time I ran for the legislature, all the way back in 1988. And that is, we all have deeply personally held views about abortion, but as a matter of public policy, the people of this state, in fact, we're the only state, where the people voted twice to make our abortion laws what they are today. And I don't think the legislature should just never say they're going to change an initiative, but on an issue this sensitive and this personal and this impactful, I think it'd be arrogant and wrong for the legislature to change our state's abortion laws. So I will defend our pro-choice laws, even to the point of, I believe the overwhelming majority of people in the state are pro-choice, and if we need to strengthen those laws, particularly to provide protection for people coming from other states, I'd be willing to do that. And the difference on this issue is stark. Senator Fortunato is one of the most anti-choice members of the legislature. Every year he introduces bills to restrict or whittle away at our laws. He just said he's pro-life. He told a conservative group in their questionnaire that he is opposed to legal abortion except to save the life of the mother if the fetus is non-viable. No exception for rape, no exception for incest, no exception for the health of the mother, no exception even for the life of the mother unless the fetus is non-viable. He is an extremist on this issue, and the women of this district and everyone who's concerned about this, if they're concerned about this issue, the choice is very clear.
So, 1988 and 1990, Chris is endorsed by Human Life of Washington. Never changed his position.
I haven't changed my position.
Democrats on their webpage apparently haven't scrubbed the fact that anti-choice Chris Vance invites anti-choice extremist Carly Fiorina to a Bellevue fundraiser when he ran for Senate. Never changed his position.
I have never changed my position.
Right.
So
then why were you endorsed by Human Life?
I don't know. I can't remember back then. I think the issue was more about perhaps public funding in 1988, and that's before the legislature, the people codified Roe v. Wade in 1991.
So you support the current abortion law?
I do.
Okay, 1851 says basically anybody with a healthcare license can do an abortion. You support that? It used to say a physician had to do an abortion. Now it says a physician, physician assistant, registered nurse, or any licensed healthcare professional can do an abortion. That basically moves a back alley abortion into the front office.
No,
that's what that does.
No, I don't think that you have trained medical professionals doing back alley abortions. I read that bill, and it says if they are trained in the procedure, and the bill was supported by the medical community in this state.
Right,
so
Planned Parenthood.
No, by doctors and midwives and osteopaths, I believe. So gynecologists, if I remember correctly, who signed it.
Because that broadens the pool of who can do an abortion, whether they're trained in a have a medical MD or not. And basically, it also removes the requirement for, or removes the liability from criminal liability should they screw up. That's what that bill does. Now, every person that I talked to that called me up that said, will you support my decision to make an abortion? And I said, I think we could both agree that having a doctor do this procedure when a woman is making this decision, which I disagree with, but it's a woman's decision. She makes this decision. She deserves the right to have the best health care possible and avoid this situation of having a punctured uterus and whatever. And if you don't think that having an abortion is a serious procedure, tell that this is a woman who just died recently in the last month of an abortion procedure.
So that's an amazing deflection, because if you had your way, it wouldn't matter who performed the abortion, you couldn't get one. And this bill went through the process.
Okay, so let's look at some of the abortion bills that I did. And I want you to tell me whether you disagree or agree with this. Collecting data on abortion statistics, agree or disagree?
I would disagree with all the bills you're about to list, because they're all intended to undermine confidence.
Undermine
in our
confidence by what? By not having the statistics. I used to, and when I got elected in 2000 or 98, I was able to open up a Department of Health book and look at the statistics on abortion. 116 women sterile because of the procedure. 81 people, or 81, so many women stayed in the hospital more than so many days.
Oh, okay, so it's right
31
there.
abortion failures. Don't you think that a woman has a right when she goes in to make this difficult decision? It's a horrible decision to make. Some women are forced into making this decision. So why don't we tell them, require informed consent? Agree or disagree? A woman should be able to get this knowledge. Now, this particular bill is interesting because the Democrats ran a bill on breast implants. A woman has a right to know the risks of breast implants. I said, take that bill, and they spoke passionately. I voted for it. Mm-hmm. She has a right to know that. I said, take that bill, cross out breast implants, and put in abortions. Why wouldn't the Democrats give that a hearing? If a woman has a right to know about breast implants, why doesn't she have the right to know about the risks of abortion? This is not something like getting your teeth cleaned. How about concerning regulations on abortion facilities? Why does abortion facilities get a waiver? Why don't they have to meet medical standards and some of their things? Establishing the woman's right to be informed, tracking abortion statistics, increasing transparency on reproductive rights. A parent's right to know. You cannot withhold medical information about their children from a parent, which currently they can do if it's kids 14 years old and has something to do with abortion. Requiring notifications on, King County passed a bill, I don't know whether you were there, but they passed an ordinance saying, a pregnancy center has to have a sign that says they don't do anything about it's not a medical facility and all that stuff. Well, why don't we have the same facility on a Planned Parenthood sign? Why are you, and we see this constant attack on pro-life centers, on pregnancy centers that want to aid women and give them the knowledge for the 3D ultrasounds. Why are Democrats so opposed to this?
Phil, I want to ask you a question.
Other than that, I don't really have an opinion.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, we can go through your bills here, but I mean, in your ideal, I think maybe a better way of asking this question is, what's in your ideal world, what do you think is the moral world in which, Washington State, would you want abortions to not be happening?
Well, yeah, I
guess
I believe, rape and incest and things like that is. My problem with that is the child is guilty for the sins of the father. That's the problem with rape and incest. Now, would I vote for a bill that said except for rape and incest? Absolutely, 100%. I'd do that tomorrow afternoon. Okay? Why? Because if it saves one life, that's good.
So
That's
you would vote tomorrow to overturn 2 votes of the people and restrict the ability of women to get abortions?
Now, first of all, I will say, and I made this statement over a period of years. We're men. This isn't going to change unless women change it. I mean, I have my opinion. I have what I'm, what I told people I'm pro-life. I'm not voting against life. I'm not voting against guns. That's my personal opinion. If you don't like my position on me being pro-life, don't vote for me. Vote for this guy.
Yes,
And,
please. Exactly. And that's the issue here to me is more than anything else, democracy. It's about democracy. Too often in this country, a radical small minority has been able to achieve political success because of things like the Electoral College or the ridiculous structuring of our United States Senate, where Alaska has as many senators as California, allowing the minority of Americans to govern. Well, this is the same case here. The majority in this state said a woman should have a right to an abortion up until the moment of viability, and past that, if a doctor believes that it's necessary to protect the life or health of the mother. He says he will vote tomorrow to change that, even though every poll shows the people of this state don't agree with that, and they voted against it. The majority should govern. That's what a democracy is. That's what the president was talking about last night. Now, thankfully, the Republicans are not going to get the majority in the Senate, probably not in the state house either. But if they ever did, and there was an attempt to roll back our abortion laws, he'd be the guy leading it.
Phil, let's finish up with you and then we'll move on to a new topic.
On the abortion issue, women have to change this. I want women to be informed about the risks of all this stuff. I mean, I want you to think about what this guy is saying. This guy is saying that your 14-year-old daughter could walk into Planned Parenthood and get an abortion without the parents' knowledge.
No, I'm saying
If a
that's what the
911,
people
if you
voted for.
call 911, you come home from work and your daughter is lying on the floor in a pool of blood and you have no idea what the problem is, and you call 911 and they think that it has something to do with abortion, they can't tell you. 13 years old for drugs, 14 years old for abortion, or viability, I'm sorry. I mean, this is unconscionable. Parents have a right to know what the heck their kids are doing. And the Democrats passed laws, for example. You're over here telling me that I'm restricting a woman's right to choose if I pass a bill that says women have the right to know, they should be informed, they should have these statistics, they should know the risks. You're telling me that that's anti-choice. How's that anti-choice? That's I mean, I disagree with the woman's decision, but at least she should be informed and all that stuff. But what happens if that's your 14-year-old daughter?
Yeah. And trying to deflect by talking about peripheral issues.
It's
when-
not a deflection at all.
when-
That's what this is all about.
No, what it's all
It's about
is
protecting
what-
our children.
What it's all about is what you said earlier, which is you would vote tomorrow to deny abortions to the overwhelming majority of women who seek them. And again, my view is, Phil and I are both Roman Catholics. We have our personal views about this. But I respect the will of the people. If anyone wants to change our state's abortion laws at all, they need to go get signatures on an initiative and take it to the people.
Let's move on unless either of you have another, anything else to add on this. But I think we've gone through that topic pretty efficiently. Make a new recording here. So just making these new recordings just so my phone doesn't run out of space in the middle of it. We've gotten into some pretty heated political topics, and I kind of want to zoom out a little bit from individual topics and just talk about the race itself and the politics that both of you are coming into this with, because I've spoken with both of you now, and one thing both of you have expressed to me is that the other guy doesn't really represent sort of the heart or the soul of the district. Phil, you've made the argument that Chris is leans too far to the left, and that he'd be better off in Seattle. Chris, you said Phil is a far right extremist, and that this might be a conservative district, but it's not conservative in the way Phil is. And so I think for voters, they're going to look at both of you and say, all right, well, which one, who does kind of represent, if not the policies I espouse, kind of maybe the worldview or the way I think it should go. And so I have a few questions on this topic, but I just want to start with, I want you both to give me an argument as to why you are the person who kind of captures the heart and the soul of the 31st district better. And I think we're on film now. So you know, walk me
Okay,
through
so 2018, horrible year for Republicans. Every Republican across the entire state either stayed the same, lost, or went down. Except me. I was the only one. My seatmates went from 56 to 55. I went from 56 to 59.8 something. You know what that means? The people that he thinks he's going to get, those independent people, that's that 3 or 4%, that extra 3 or 4%. I'm getting a greater proportion of those people that believe that they are more independent than even my seatmates at the time. So how is that? And just using the word extreme is kind of, it reminds me of Dick Armey when years ago, and the Democrats just repeat the same talking point. Using the word extreme, when he says the word extreme, cross that out and write in common sense. That's what it is. Okay? Do I believe in taxes? No. I think we got enough money. We're spending enough money in taxes. We got to start rolling back these taxes and try to give people targeted tax cuts. Reduce the burden on working families. As opposed to, oh, let's screw the rich guy, right? We're going to raise taxes on the rich guy. That doesn't help the guy at the lower end. It just simply gives you're just feeding the beast to spend more money. When you look at gun control or something, I mean, the district voted 56% for Trump in 16 and 54% for Trump in 20. And this guy suffers from Trump derangement syndrome. Now, was Trump my first pick for president? No, I like Ted Cruz. You may not like Ted Cruz. I like Ted Cruz. All right, he was my guy. But Trump got to be president. I didn't like the guy personally. I mean, I didn't like his hair. I didn't like when he called people names. But his economic policy was great for this country. And my retirement plan got 47% return. Right now, under Democrat control, it's in the dumper. I'll be lucky to get back to the point where I was before Trump got elected. I mean, every time I get my retirement account, it's down, it's down, and down. The people don't want a moderate approach to taxes. They want staunch opposition. They don't want a moderate approach to government regulation. They want staunch, resistance to that. They want to roll back regulation. They want to get the government out of their families. The News Tribune said I had a reflexive opposition to government regulation. That's why you should not vote for me. Yeah, that's true, I do. I'm looking, every time I look at something, I want to get the government the heck out of the way. What can I do to get government out of the way? Gun control. You have to be very wary of somebody that starts off a conversation that says, I'm a gun owner, but I believe in responsible, more gun regulation. I mean, the regulations that we have in this state are ridiculous. They're overburdensome. They put people's lives at risk. They're, guns are really a woman's issue. They're not a man's issue. Women need the protection of a firearm more than a man does. This magazine limit is ridiculous. It puts law-abiding citizens at a disadvantage when there's 79 million magazines out there in excess of 30 rounds and 74 million pistol magazines in excess of 10 rounds. Stupid. And then, we're doing this to protect our children. You're not protecting our children in school. You want to pass a law that affects 300 million people, or in this case, 7.5 million people in this state, as opposed to simply protecting our schools. I mean, I get armed protection when we're in the legislature, but yet our children are protected with a sign. It's stupid.
So we'll get back to you, but Chris, go ahead, because I want to give you a chance to respond to all this.
Well, yeah, and we haven't talked about really interesting thing about this race yet, which is that I'm trying to become the first independent elected to the Washington State Legislature ever. And that's hard. That's hard. When we got into this race, we did so based on polling that showed that it was a very viable path, that people are hungry for change, that There are far more independents and Democrats in this district than there are Republicans. There are far more moderates and liberals in this district than there are conservatives. But, you know, it's hard when you're trying to do something that's never been done before. We're optimistic that it's going to work. But I do know that there is just a hunger out there for something different in American politics. Both parties have lost their minds. Okay, I was a Republican for 37 years. I dare say I did a hell of a lot more for the Republican Party than Senator Fortunato did. I was part of the Republican leadership in the House. I was part of the Republican majority in the King County Council. I was the chairman of the state Republican Party in George W. Bush's first term. And the party has changed radically. And I can't be part of that anymore. But I'm still not a Democrat. And I think that is where the majority of people are in most places. Not in really hardcore red rural districts, but that's not what the 31st district is, especially not what it's becoming. Now, I represented this community 30 years ago in the legislature, and Enumclaw is probably still pretty conservative, especially the plateau, but there's far less of the plateau in the district. The real growth in the district is in upper income, brand new suburban developments being built in Bonnie Lake. And those folks are not conservatives. And this district is going to move to the left over the next few years. How far, how fast, I don't know. Now, I was what I considered then a moderate Republican. I served in the legislature with a lot of people who were pro-choice Republicans, who were very strong on the environment and labor. That's all gone. There's no one like that. There are still a lot of Republicans who are trying to keep their heads down and adhere to relatively normal pre-Trump policies. I would say our two House members, Drew Stokesbury and Eric Robertson, both of them long-term friends of mine, are like that. And you know what? I wouldn't run against either of them. But then there's a lot of other Republicans out there who think that the path to success is to be as loud and extreme and flamboyant as possible. And that's Senator Fortunato. I mean, he goes out and forms a freedom caucus in the Washington State Senate. What, as if the Republicans aren't conservative enough? And takes extreme positions, introduces bills that are never gonna pass. So, is he an extremist? Well, let's see. Try and stop the certification of the 2020 election and then try and ban vote by mail? Write to the Attorney General and say that we're teaching our kids critical race theory? Try and amend the Constitution to say that a gun can have as many bullets as it can possibly carry in the Constitution? He votes against bills to make it easier for women and other rape victims and victims of sexual assault to get a protective order because it might involve taking away somebody's gun. There was a bill, I think it was 3 years ago, where we have in this country, in a small number of areas, something called the trans panic defense, where if you're out on a Friday night and you're with an individual who you think is one gender, and then later on in the evening you find out they're not, and you react violently, maybe even kill them, you can go to court and claim that you were suffering trauma because you suddenly figured out which gender they were. It's never been done here in this state, but the legislature passed a bill affirmatively to say that's not a defense in Washington State. There were 3 no votes in the state Senate. Every other Republican voted yes. He voted no. He voted to allow someone who kills someone who's transgender to then use that as a defense in court. His position on guns, if he had his way, given all his votes, anybody, because I don't think he supports universal background checks, and I know he voted against the ban on ghost guns, anybody could buy a rifle, which you could then convert to a machine gun. He voted against the bill banning bump stocks. With an unlimited number of bullets, he voted against the high-capacity magazine and carried into a school board meeting because he voted against that bill. Yeah, I'm a gun owner, and I think people have a right to own firearms, but they don't have a right to own anything and carry it anywhere. And I certainly wouldn't bring a gun to the Capitol campus and display it at a protest, which he did. So I think this is a moderate, common sense, no new taxes, and I am adamantly opposed to raising taxes on the people of the state of Washington. There's no need for it. Our state revenues have doubled in the past 10 years. And I think I've been viewed as tough on crime, but on some of these other issues and just the general approach to office, I think I'm a much better fit for this district, and we'll just have to see what happens in November.
Yeah. On this subject, I had kind of specific questions for each of you, kind of related to, your records. And Phil, just very briefly want to give you a chance if you want to respond to any specifics he made, but real quick, and then I'll get into the next.
Well, first of all, the bump stock ban was stupid. Bump stocks are, nobody I know cares about bump stocks. If you want a bump stock, here's what you do. You take your gun, you lip your thumb in the thing, in your belt pants, and presto, you got a bump stock. So he really doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And then that original bill on the bump stock ban banned firearms that use recoil to cycle. Now that happens to ban every semi-automatic firearm. Now when I brought that up to the sponsor of the bill, the response I got back was, what does recoil have to do with a semi-automatic firearm? So they obviously have no idea how a firearm works. And, we're not trying to take your gun rights away. You just can't carry it here, you can't carry it there, you can't carry it here, right? So we're not trying to take away your rights. But, okay, so now you can't carry a gun carry a gun within 75 feet of a protest or something. So what, you gonna have some guy out there with a tape measure? It's kind of odd that, when people look at the magazine limit, for example, I had an amendment, a very simple amendment on that bill. If that amendment would have passed, I would have voted for the bill. It simply said, this bill only applies to criminals, because that's the people that you're trying to affect. Now, law-abiding citizens currently would be limited to 10 rounds. You think a criminal is going to pay any attention to that? There's already, I don't know how many magazines out there in the state. Pardon me. I think I have 40 or 50 that exceed 10 rounds. And to try to limit it at this point is nonsense. It's not doing anything. But we need to do a better approach at these people that are actually committing the crimes and focus on that. And it just makes me laugh when people go, we want reasonable gun control. Okay. What exactly wait a minute, are we talking about guns, or we're gonna save that up?
Let's save that, because I do have a couple questions for each of you that I want to get your reactions to.
Yeah.
Are we back to Chris?
Yes, we are.
Okay, we're back to Chris. Let me just make sure the recording is still going strong. Yep, sure is.
And the mass shooters recently, Uvalde, at the Labor Day rally, all the mass shooters recently were people who went into gun stores, who had never been criminals before, bought semi-automatic and a huge magazine legally. It's not about criminals, it's about what is available easily to people. And that, okay.
Mm-hmm.
27 million AR-15s, 79 million magazines are already out there.
Yeah.
So
How do you propose to do that? You're going to seize everybody's firearm?
So let's get back to this, but here's, so like I said, I've got a question for each of you specifically. I'm gonna start with you, Chris. You're running on an independent, moderate platform, and as someone who's not necessarily gonna caucus with either party, in some of the campaigning materials or just some of the statements that I know Phil's campaign has made, about your efforts, one thing that I have seen brought up with is an interview you had with the Spokesman Review, where you said, basically that you disagree with the Democrats on a lot of issues. The exact quote I have is, I disagree with the Democrats on a lot of issues, but I think they're more serious about trying to address the issues confronting the state. You also said that in this sort of rare, specific situation where you would have 24 Democrats and 24 Republicans, you'd likely caucus with the
Not
Democrats.
likely, I will.
You
And
will.
not caucus with them.
Vote with them, I
yeah,
apologize.
Right.
And so I guess my question here is, I think the argument that I'm sure Phil's campaign would make on that is to say, oh, well, look, that means, caught you red-handed, or blue-handed rather, that makes you a Democrat if that's where you break. Do you see it that way, or I guess, what's your perspective on where you land in this? Because it's not easy to kind of navigate that as a moderate, but you seem to That seems to be where you're
Well, it's
going.
never been done before, and so there's no roadmap for this. And you know, I mean, I'm not a Republican anymore. I think we made that clear. But I'm not a Democrat. And you know, in this country, you shouldn't have to be a member of these two parties to have the right to run for office and serve in office. It's insane. Where does it say that in the Constitution? It doesn't. And I've been very upfront about this. I mean, I'm getting a lot of help from Democrats. A lot of Democratic senators have personally written me checks, Democratic interest groups, because I'm sure they'd work with me than with Senator Fortunato. I'm also getting help from a fair number of Republicans and a lot of independents. But I'm not going to caucus with either party. I think that is intellectually dishonest. I mean, Bernie Sanders runs as an independent, then caucuses with the Democrats. Angus King from Maine does the same thing. I'm not going to do that. When they go to caucus, where they actually go behind closed doors, I'm going to sit by myself out on the Senate floor and go over the calendar of what bills are coming up next. I don't want their caucus support. I'm not going to be a member of the Democratic caucus in any way. During this campaign, by the way, I'm handicapped because this is getting into the weeds of a campaign, but when you run for the legislature in a big, high, and a targeted race, and this is one of the 5 races that people are targeting around the state for the state Senate, you can get a lot of money from your party and a lot of money from the caucus campaign committee. Senator Fortunato had a mailing paid for by the Washington State Republican Party. I don't get that. I'm not a Democrat, so they can't do that for me, either one. But on the first day, the Senate takes a series of votes to determine committee makeup, the rules of the Senate, who's going to be and if the Senate is 24 to 24, with me as the 25th vote, then I've got to make a decision. Otherwise, my vote doesn't mean anything. And in that case, it's not a hard decision. I think the state, I don't think the Republicans should be in a position of governing the state Senate, given where they stand on education, where they stand on transportation. And so if I'm put in that position, I will vote for the Democrats. But that doesn't mean I'm caucusing with the Democrats. I'm going to be a true independent. No one's ever done it before. We'll see if it works. But I am determined to try.
I don't know what the heck that means.
I know you don't.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
Okay, so you're not going to caucus with the Democrats. You're not going to caucus with the Republicans. How are you going to get your committee assignments?
I'll answer
Who's going to give you that?
I've talked to Senator Billig about this, and he assures me that he'll give me committee assignments. But if they don't, if the body refuses to treat a non-Republican, non-Democrat like a regular senator, don't give me a parking place, don't give me an office, don't give me committee assignments, then I'm going to take that to the people and say, look, these two parties think they own this system, and they do not. So I'm confident I'll have committee assignments. I'm quite confident.
If you vote to give the Democrats control, you've basically given away the store.
No, I don't agree with that.
Because the Democrats control the rules of the Senate, the Democrats control the rules of the committees, they determine what bills get heard, they determine what bills go to what committee, all of that. They control what bills come to the Senate floor. You talked about the pursuit bill. The pursuit bill was on the reconciliation calendar, and the Democrats killed it. The Democrats, when it passed the Senate and passed the House, the Democrats in the Senate killed it. Okay, that's the control that he's giving to the other party.
So
when you look at the
Republicans,
Republicans had the Senate for 7 years, and when we weren't able to pass anything, but we were able to stop a heck of a lot. And when you talk about education reform, everybody agrees that the Republican proposal to fix education, the McCleary fix, was a finally fixed education. Everybody voted for it.
Okay.
And
let's play this out. My vote only matters if it's 24 Republicans, 24 Democrats, and me. Okay, imagine that scenario. Yes, I vote with the Democrats on day one to write the rules and everything else. But then every single bill that comes to the floor, in order for you to get 25 votes, the Democrats will need my vote. And I'm not going to give it to them unless I agree with that policy. And that will include motions to bring bills to the floor. So if he wins and it's 25 Republicans and 24 Democrats, you'll have complete Republican control. If it's 24-24, I'm going to force bipartisanship. This is kind of the dream that moderates and independents have had for decades, which is elect a few independents, deny both parties the majority, force them to come to the center where most Americans are. But I do not believe, looking at the results of the primary, that the Republicans are going to get close to 24 seats in the Senate. I think this is a moot point. And boy, I would love to talk about education funding and McCleary on this, because Senator Fortunato has sponsored legislation to take billions out of education.
We'll jump onto that, and we can probably do that next. I do want to pose my question to Phil here. So you've been very upfront about the fact that you this year skipped out on the News Tribune and Seattle Times editorial board interviews. I know you said to me, basically, it seemed like you didn't feel like you'd get a fair shake there.
And the League of Women Voters debate.
League of Women Voters. So I think I understand your reasoning for doing so. You're looking at these organizations and saying, well, these are probably not politically aligned with where I'm at. It's not going to be, I think had you gone to the News Tribune or Seattle Times editorial boards, it's probably fair to say that it would not have resulted in an endorsement for you anyway. As a journalist, I do wonder what you think your obligation to the press is, because as you both well know, part of being a politician, part of doing this job, is dealing with the media, and that includes when you feel they're antagonistic, or when you have a problem with maybe the bent that they're taking. Do you see an issue in kind of shutting off access to them, even if you don't feel like you are kind of in alignment with them?
It's kind of interesting because when I got appointed, young guy, can't remember his name now. Young guy was a News Tribune reporter. He came in and I said to him, I don't care what you write about me. Just don't make stuff up. None of this innuendo, none of this stuff, just print what I say. I don't have a problem with that. You want an answer to a question? I'm here because you said it's an interview, okay? I don't have a problem with that. If you said it was an endorsement interview, I might have hesitated a little bit, because I don't care what you think. All I care about is what the rest of the district does and what they think. I don't care what you think.
Would you have driven up to Seattle for an interview if it wasn't for an endorsement, if it was just purely by the news team?
They did it by Zoom.
Okay, so would you have attended if
probably not, because nobody cares about what Seattle thinks. I mean, nobody here reads the Seattle Times.
Really?
Maybe the News Tribune, maybe. I mean, the News Tribune did a couple of articles, and that young guy that did it, he wrote some good articles.
But do you believe you have an obligation to, I guess the point of my question is, whether or not anyone reads the Seattle Times, they're part of this group of media that, is ostensibly tasked with holding politicians like you accountable. And do you believe you have a responsibility to participate in that process?
Yeah, if they call me up and ask me a question, they want to talk about legislation, they want to talk about my stance on stuff, sure.
But you wouldn't do that interview?
I wouldn't do an endorsement interview, because I don't, why would I go to them, downtown Seattle, and say, I care about what you think about these conservative issues? Because they've never printed that. All their editorial stuff is all left wing. It's all whacked out stuff for this district. I mean, what do I care what they think?
Okay, so look, this whole thing's a perfect example of how I think evidence that Senator Fortunato is an extremist and on an extreme wing of the Republican Party. For every other Republican went to these interviews. Virtually every other Republican went to these interviews. Representative Stokesbury went to these interviews. Representative Stokesbury was at the League of Women Voters debate. There's another League of Women Voters debate scheduled for October. Are you going to come?
No,
of course not. Of course not.
Stupid.
He is radically out of step. And it is wrong to say that newspapers only endorse Republicans. They endorsed Representative Stokesbury. They endorsed a lot of Republicans. He is not the type of Republican that is going to get the support of any of these civic organizations, because he's an extremist. He's way too far to the right.
So my opponent is way too far to the left, and he's way too extreme on all these issues for the district.
Sure.
He's extreme on abortion. He's extreme on guns. He's extreme on giving the Democrats control of the Senate. Has no idea what he's talking about. And you know, he likes to say that he was represented his district. So, you know, what's online is only 1992. So 1992 and 1994, he said Fortunato is not a serious legislator. 1992, he had 10 bills that he sponsored, one of which was guide dogs, and I think that one actually passed. In 1994, he sponsored 4 bills.
I wasn't in the House in 1990.
So, well, I mean, that's what it says, 93, 94.
Yes,
So
yes.
sponsored by Vance. So maybe half of that year. That's why there's only 4. I mean, conversely, look at what bills that I sponsor are serious bills that affect serious issues.
Oh.
You want to solve homelessness? Here's the bill. You want to fund transportation? Here's the bill. You want to deal with education? Here's the bill. Okay? I mean, give me an issue, I'll tell you what I did to sponsor. You want to talk about election integrity? Okay, here's the bill.
Well, after this, we're going to jump on to, we're going to get close to wrapping up. We'll talk about education and transportation, which I know are issues for both of you, and then we'll do some final cleanup. If you want to just give a brief response to that.
Well, gee, let's see. Well, when I was in the legislature, we were in a very small minority, but I still was a key member of the House Education Committee. There's language in state law, especially in House Bill 1209, which created the first statewide standards that I adopted. I got a bill passed all the way through, signed by the governor, to do mandatory treatment of sexually aggressive youth. You had a kid up here on the plateau who was, I think, actually attacking other kids, and because there was a hole in state law, we couldn't do anything. But then I only spent 3 years in the House. I spent 8 years on the King County Council, chairing all the major committees on the council. I was the budget chairman, I was the transportation chairman, and I was the chairman of the Growth Management Committee and led the process to adopt our landmark Growth Management Act, which has, in my mind, prevented sprawl from rolling out like a carpet all the way to the reason we don't look like Southern California is because we have managed our growth effectively. Now, there's things we need to change about that, and I want to change in the legislature. But yeah, he has bills on education and transportation. None of them pass, and they are completely unrealistic. Again, he wants to education, transportation at the same time. He wants to take the sales tax on cars and move it out of the general fund, which supports education, and put it in the transportation budget. That would cut the general fund by over $25 billion, and most of the money in the general fund is for education. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen, and it would gut our schools. He sponsored a bill to let people who homeschool and private school their kids not pay education property taxes. Oh, okay, how about if I don't have to pay taxes for human services that I'll never use, or a road I'll never drive on? There's a value to having strong public schools, and everybody should pay. But he grandstands always to his far right base, because as he said, he only cares about conservative policies and conservatives. This district is more than just conservative Republicans, and they deserve to have representation.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The state has a paramount duty to provide education.
It's beyond that,
correct?
Yes, it's beyond that.
Why does it have to be at state schools? Why can't we fund parents who choose to homeschool their children or choose to send their kids to private school? Now, the Constitution says you can't take state dollars and fund those things, which is why, if you give them a property tax exemption, it doesn't go to the state. It stays in that family budget, and we are funding the education of those children based on what the parents want their children to, where they want them to be educated, and how they want to address it. What is wrong with giving parents that opportunity?
Number one, most private schools in this state are religious-based parochial schools.
So what?
It's unconstitutional.
No, it's unconstitutional to take state dollars. That's why you
right.
give them the property tax exemption, and you let them take their own money, and if they want to send their child to a religious school, what is wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody should have.
And it is in the state's interest to have educated children. provide an education system. Why does it have to be this monopolistic government program?
See,
And why?
Well, let Chris answer your question.
See, and the tone of his response is the whole thing. He and other MAGA Republicans demean public education, accuse them of teaching strange doctrines in their school, which is absurd. And say our schools aren't doing a good job, and let's take the money out of the schools and give it to the parents, and it's all about undermining public education, okay? My wife is a special ed para-educator. Half of my family are all teachers and para-educators. I think every single person who works in a public school is a hero. I think our public schools are some of the best in the world, and they are underfunded and understaffed because the state has not met its paramount duty. And taking money out of that, it just makes that gap even worse. I am endorsed by all the state's educators and the Children's Campaign Fund and everybody in this state who cares about kids and education because he demeans and undermines our public schools.
My questions
So-
were going to be education, so this is great. So go ahead, Phil.
Okay, so let's talk about taking money out of the general fund to fund education. So, 11.9 cent gas tax. If you pass this gas tax, we're going to give you all these great projects, and it's going to do all this great economic benefit. It's going to do this and this and this and this. To which I said, if that's the case, why aren't you doing that anyway? So let's take the sales tax for motor vehicles out of the general fund and give it to transportation. It represents about 4%. So what would happen if we do that? If we did that, it would result in about $24 billion going into transportation over a period of 16 years to match the existing thing. And it would provide $56 billion in economic stimulus using the same matrix that they're comparing to that when you got the 11.9 cent gas tax. So either you're getting a $56 billion benefit or they lied to you when they sold the 11.9 cent gas tax. Which is it? And if we are getting $56 billion in jobs and economic benefit and growth and all that stuff, why aren't we doing that anyway? Okay, we purposely starve transportation, and transportation is the lifeblood of the economy. It moves freight, we are a trade-dependent state.
We'll get into transportation in just a minute, but I want to keep us focused here, and Phil, and I'll get to you in a second, Chris, but let's jump back to education. What's your vision for it, and what
So
do we need to do here?
one of the bills I ran was a waiver, school board waivers, I called it. Now, a superintendent came into my office and said, I need $3 million for whatever, special ed or whatever program it was.
Whatever.
And I said, okay, here's 1,477 regulations that the state of Washington passes on to your local school district. Find something that costs $3 million that you don't want to do. Right? Now, so I draft a bill and it says, if you are a school district and you don't want to do something, the state of Washington tells you you have to do this, and you don't want to do it, you can request a waiver. And if you request a waiver, it goes through the state school board, it goes through this and that and all that stuff. And if that waiver is granted, you then get to spend that money however you want in your local school district. I believe the Enumclaw School District, the Bonnie Lake Sumner School District, the local school districts can spend their money better than some legislator down in Olympia mandating statewide what every school district in the entire state has to do. So the advantage of that would be, because somebody said to me, well, what happens if you don't get a waiver? I said, well, it's actually not so important that they get the waiver. It is important that they apply for the waiver, because I, as a legislator, don't know anything unless somebody tells me. Okay? I am expecting, if we put this program in place, costs $0, doesn't cost anything, we put this in place, and let's say all the rural school districts start complaining about something. These list of things. All the local school, rural school districts are complaining about this. All the urban school districts are complaining about a different set of regulations. Now we as legislators can see that information and we can make changes to state law because it's not about the amount of money that we're spending on education, it's how they're spending it. And local school boards should be able to move money around based on the amount of money that they get, based on what they believe is critical in their school district.
So I want to take this to Chris real quick, and I'll give you a chance to respond, but you're not a fan of this idea, clearly.
First of all, he never answered. So yeah, you're going to take $25 billion out of the general fund, give it to transportation. That would almost fully fund transportation. Yes, it would. Well, how are you going to plug the hole you just created in the general fund that mostly goes to education? This is a lot of what non-serious conservatives do. It's not about money. It's about regulations, or it's about cutting waste and overhead. Look. Our schools are not going to get better by just hiring, by just buying a few fewer paper clips. The problem is the state is not meeting its constitutional responsibility to amply fund a uniform system of basic education. Uniform, everywhere. It is a founding principle of this state that no matter where a kid lives, they get a great education, okay? I worked for Superintendent Randy Dorn in the McCleary era when we tried to get the legislature to meet its responsibility. They took like 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back. You're still overly dependent on levies. What does that mean? It means that school districts here get fewer dollars per kid than schools in Bellevue and Seattle and Mercer Island. That's just wrong, and it's blatantly unconstitutional, okay? And it is, the biggest gap is in special ed, where you've got kids showing up to school with autism, they have individual education plans, and they are over the cap that the state provides for funding, so the school districts have to use levy dollars to pay for that. That's insane. The state should fully fund basic education for special ed kids, no matter how many there are. Teachers should not be having to buy supplies. My wife goes out and buys stuff to bring into the classroom. That's been going on forever, and it shouldn't happen. But people just make excuses. Oh, there's too much regulation, there's too much overhead. No, the problem is the state is not meeting its paramount duty. And this will be job one for me. This is the main reason I ran. I was a member of the House Education Committee. I don't think Senator Fortunato has ever served on education. He clearly doesn't understand how it works. And I will be on the Education Committee. I will try and get a seat on the Ways and Means Committee, and I will not vote for a state budget that doesn't move us significantly down the road towards full funding of education without levies.
Okay,
We'll do, give your response and we're going to move on.
Okay, so let's take a look at what he said. The McCleary fix that was put in place basically took away all local school levies, because the whole basis of the McCleary decision was you are taking local school levies and you're using that to fund basic education. Basic education should be funded by the state. That's the basis. And what he is saying about Bellevue and things like that having a disproportionate amount of money is true. Okay, that's what happened. But after we did the McCleary fix, what happened was we took away all local school levies and we replaced it with a state levy. Now what that meant was that the Bellevue School District, which had I don't know what the exact number is, but let's say the Bellevue School District had a school levy of like 90 cents because their property values are very high. They don't need a very big levy to get a lot of money. Kirkland, same thing. Issaquah, same thing. In this district, I'm going from memory now, but the school levy in Enumclaw School District was something like either $3.25, $3.50, something like that. Auburn was $2.75. Carbonado, which basically only has 400 people, $6.60. All that went away, and it was replaced by a $1.50 state school levy across everything. So everybody got a minimum amount of money at that time, $14,000 something. Currently, now there was a ban on school levies for 2 years unless they wanted to fund something else other than basic education, band, athletics, whatever. So they could still have a levy, but they couldn't fund basic education because that was going to be funded by the state. And if they did start funding school basic education with levy money, that's going to cause what we call McCleary 2. Currently, we are funding now at 2019 levels because there's 50, 60, 70,000 fewer kids enrolled in school now. So rather than in previous years, everything was based on enrollment. Now all of a sudden we're funding 50, 60,000 ghost students that aren't even there. So we're funding at that level, which is going to allow the local school districts, and then we took away the levy restrictions. So now the local school districts can then issue a levy also, which now sets yourself up for McCleary too. So
That's just factually not true.
I'm not sure. Look it up.
I lived it. I was part of it.
Well, you're part of it before all this stuff went into place. So look at this.
They passed a bill that lowered the amount of levies that school districts could charge, and they did increase the state school levy. They didn't create a new one; they increased it. But then they turned around and took and gave school districts more authority for more levies, and they said that levies could only be used for enrichment. But the definition of enrichment is so broad that it is still basic education. So you still have, and talk to any school district administrator around here, every school district is using levies to pay staff, not not do band uniforms, not do sports, to pay teachers and pay paraeducators and custodians and all their classified staff. School districts are using levies to pay staff that are engaged in basic education. Perhaps you noticed that there were all these levies this last spring, fall, all around the state, and you had school districts saying, if this doesn't pass, we're going to have to lay off 400 people. The legislature started to do the McCleary fix, but to say that they've done it is just, I mean, he and I disagree on philosophy. That's just factually wrong, and he should know better.
Even the Seattle Times said it was fixed.
No one's ever said it's fixed.
Let's move on from this topic.
Yeah, I've got a call at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, what time are we at right now?
Quarter of.
Okay, that's plenty of time. We're gonna talk about transportation, and then we're gonna wrap it up here. Another really important issue. I think we're back to Chris here, I believe. And my question is, the Plateau area kind of has a unique transportation challenge where in many ways we kind of have the best of both worlds out here. We have proximity to Seattle and Tacoma, an hour away from a Mariners game or a movie, but you also have a sort of charming, way of life out here. One of the challenges that comes with that is, it is, if you travel by bus, it can be difficult to get in or out of the area. And then on top of that, you've got the regular maintenance and work that needs to be done for cars. And so there's a lot of factors that kind of make this a unique transportation challenge. So my question is, what would you do to improve the transportation scene on the plateau, basically? What would your plan be?
Yeah, I'll do the plateau first, but on the broader picture, the issue with transportation is we've always used the gas tax as the overwhelmingly primary source to fund transportation. The problem is the gas tax is a shrinking resource. People are moving to electric cars, they drive less, cars are more efficient, we're just using less gas tax revenues are shrinking, so the state is forced to adopt a series of ad hoc packages to try and plug the hole by raising the gas tax or doing something else. That's not a good situation, but it's better than not having our bridges and roads repaired and not building new projects. But Senator Fortunato's voted against every one of these packages, no matter what they propose, whether it's a gas tax increase or anything else, because his only solution is take money out of education to pay for transportation. The legislature just passed a huge transportation package that I would have voted for and he voted against. That's going to dramatically increase transportation funding around the state. Is it perfect? No, I don't like it because it starts to actually take a little money out of the general fund, which I don't like. But it is better than doing nothing. Now, long term, we've got to use this time now to find a long-term, sustainable way to pay for transportation. I would like to explore the idea of using an infrastructure bank, which is an idea used around the country and in other states, where you have the state take the gas tax and then pair it with private sector funding and investments and sell rights for this and that, use toll roads and things to use private sector funding, because we can't keep raising the gas tax. We can't. I mean, it's very high now, and it, as I said, it's a diminishing resource. Now, this whole district has a transportation problem, except downtown Auburn, really, where they're close to, anyway. The plateau is hampered because it's in the middle of a rural area. And you are not allowed to expand highways or roads of any type in a rural area. So we can't increase capacity on 164 or 169 or 410. You're never going to get rail out here. The only real answer is more buses, more bus routes, both Metro Transit and Sound Transit. My opponent is like reflexively opposed to transit, which I don't understand. But that's the best thing we can do is more transit service here in terms of buses. But the real crisis is on the other side of the river. There are no buses in East Pierce County. There is no transit in Bonnie Lake, except the Sound Transit bus that takes you to the park and ride to the Sounder station, which is packed every day, and those Sounder trains are packed every day. Pierce County has got to do more in terms of transit. If you go to Federal Way, you have, just over the border in King County, you have Metro buses circulating through those suburban neighborhoods, through the cul-de-sacs, picking people up, small buses that take them to a transit center, and from there they can get a bus or a train to Seattle. It is a rational transportation system. In Bonnie Lake and Tahali and those areas, nothing. There should be feeder buses circulating through Bonnie Lake, bringing people to a central point where they can get a regional bus or down to the Sumner train station. This is largely a county problem, but I want to work with Pierce County to dramatically increase transit service. Same thing, by the way, 410 going up the Eli Hill, which when I was a kid growing up in Sumner was not what it is now. You can't expand that. So the only real answer in this district is more transit.
Phil, go ahead.
So have you ever heard the 80-20 rule? 80-20 rule.
Refresh my memory.
80% of your profit comes from 20% of your customer, 80% of your problems come from 20% of your customer, blah, blah, blah. 80-20 rule. If you took that and you applied it to transit, if I went and knocked on people's doors, for example, if you go doorbelling, would you take transit? People would say, I would take transit if it was convenient. If I could walk to the end of my road here and get on a bus and take transit, I would do it. I said, funny you should say that, because the guy in the next street over said the same thing. The guy one street over from him said the same thing. I said, now, I suggest that if you make transit more convenient, you make it totally unusable. My daughter worked in downtown Kent, for example. We lived up on the hill on the Kent-Renton border. Took her an hour and 10 minutes to take the bus from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. But you could drive there in 10 minutes because the bus went like this, right? Picking everybody up, stopping every 300 feet. So I suggest that if we make it more, open, that what we can do is we need park and ride express bus, park and ride express bus. You know, instead of going over here and getting on a bus, for example, that went driving all around Enumclaw to pick people up, people go to a park and ride, they get on an express bus, they go downtown to Auburn, they get on a train if that's what they want to do, whatever. Same thing from Bonnie Lake, whatever. I favor, if we're going to have a transit system, I favor buses because they use the existing infrastructure. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can run it more frequently. You can do that based on population. So if people chose to ride the bus, that would be the way to do it. So by making it 20% more inconvenient, you make it 80% more usable is the point. So if you were going to do that, but
let's zoom out to transportation. in general.
1998, I get elected to the House. I run a bill. Take the sales tax from the sale of motor vehicles, put it in a transportation account. Why? I said people are going to buy more fuel-efficient cars. People are going to buy more electric cars. The gas tax revenue is going to flatten out. And so you can't, but the cost of construction and the cost of right-of-way is going to increase with inflation. The problem with transportation funding is not dollars, it's inflation. It's not the revenue stream, it's not the gas tax, it's inflation. The cost of right-of-way is going up on a 30-degree angle. The cost of construction is going up on a 30-degree angle, but the gas tax revenue is flat. So you can't fund this with this. If you take the sales tax from the sale of motor vehicles and you stick it into the gas tax account, which, by the way, was written into the Republican budget that we proposed, so you can do it without affecting education. Now, the line goes like this. So now, without a gas tax increase, you're funding transportation, you're building I get my darn bridge here. I've been fighting for 5 years to get the bridge, a new bridge, enlarge this 410 going into Buckley to stop that 330 traffic jam for like 5 years. You know, you can fund all that. We get a new bridge over to Columbia. We get all of that stuff. Now, all of that, we are an export state. We are a trade-dependent state. We need to get stuff from Eastern Washington to the ports and out the door. By the time they keep screwing around with this, doing piecemeal, for example, they're going to connect 167 to I-5 to get to the port, 509 to get to the port. Great. And that's going to be better for Eastern Washington. It's not going to be better for Eastern Washington unless you widen Route 18 through Auburn, finish Route 18 at the other end, do the interchange at the I-90 and all that. You need to do all of that in order to make transportation fun. How are you going to do that with this? I made the mistake of not getting my driver's license before July 1 when this great transportation package kicks in, which raises every fee 2, 3, 4, 500%, right? The only way, they purposely starve at transportation, and they sell you on the fact that the only way you can get a road is to pass a tax package. And that's untrue. They got $6 billion in extra money. What'd they do with it? You could have taken $2.4 billion in transportation sales tax, and you could have funded transportation with that. Mm-hmm. I mean, so it's not like they're short of money. I mean, they're getting these surpluses every year. And in order to keep that surplus going, in order to fund education, we need to have a transportation plan that's going to keep our economy growing.
Let's wrap this question up here. Just any last kind of thoughts on the transportation issue?
A lot of good ideas for transportation. How do you pay for it other than stealing money from education? I mean, his only answer to everything is to take a $25 billion chunk out of the state's general fund. It would help fund a lot of transportation, but then how do you plug that hole? And there is no answer to it. It's just typical, again, of the non-serious thinking that did not used to characterize the Republican Party, but does now, which is just, well, it's all, there's overhead, there's surpluses, we can just do stuff and it's painless. It's nonsensical.
Last remarks, Phil?
So, why is it nonsensical to say, let's be responsible with the amount of money that the taxpayer sends to Olympia? Why is that nonsensical? Why is it always we need to raise some tax to do something? Why can't we look at what and prioritize our spending? They got the projection for a 4-year budget was $15 billion more than they expected. $15 billion over 4 years, more than they expected. Taxpayers, with all the suffering that they're doing, is sending this money to Olympia, and what are they doing with it? 1,100 new state programs. That's what they got for the extra money that they spent to Olympia. Now, don't do the 1,100 new programs and fund transportation. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out why, if you take money out of transportation and you build a road, or out of the general fund, and you build a road, that hurts education, but when you flush money down the toilet on transit, it doesn't. So why is that?
So all the people in your district that are going to line up tomorrow, tomorrow Saturday, line up at the Sound Transit stations to ride those trains. That money is just being flushed. You have no respect for how people actually live. And transit is a huge component of transportation, and you have no respect or regard for it.
So that's not true. I go,
okay.
when you look at transit, an example, I get a briefing on the toll for 167 405. The managed lanes, and they call them managed lanes because they don't like using tolls because people don't like toll roads. The managed lanes increased transit ridership by 9%. How many people is that? 124. 124 people is 9%. So if 10% is 150, be generous, that means 1,500 people are taking the bus up and down 405, right? It's not significant. You need to expand the roadways. You need to expand the transportation system. We need to be moving freight, and that's what stimulates our economy. transit is a component of that, but I'm not sold on light rail. I think sound
So
transit's
we
out of
need to
control.
wrap up, but I gotta say something really quick. He doesn't understand, there's two types of people who use transit. One are suburban professionals or whatever who commute to downtown Seattle or downtown Tacoma for their jobs. But then there's poor people, black people, disabled people, who are what we call transit dependent. They need those bus routes that you derided that take so long to get anywhere because transit is their only means of transportation, and we lose money on that. I was on the
It's
county
cheaper
council.
to give those people a
Oh,
swiper card and
please.
say, take a taxi.
Oh, please. They can't, now, if they're in a wheelchair, they need
We gotta wrap up, gentlemen. I'm gonna stop the recording here and make one.
call it 1 o'clock, so.
Okay, we got a minute and a half left. There's one question I did want to wrap up with both of you. We're gonna start with Phil. We're gonna be real quick here. What is something you respect in Chris?
I'm having a hard time trying to figure that out. I guess his family.
Okay.
You know, he seems to be a good family guy. I haven't seen anything but I mean, I can't think of anything else.
All right, fair enough. Chris, what's something you respect in Phil?
Senator Fortunato is open and honest and consistent about what he believes, and he stands up for what he believes in. I like that. I just don't like what he believes in.
Okay. Gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun, a lot of energy here. I really appreciate you coming in. I think we're all a little hungry and tired, so let's wrap it up here. I'll shake both your hands.
Thank you.
Thank you for
All right,
coming in.
yep,
Thank you for
thanks.
coming in.
Okay, good job.